the situation on land was getting complicated. But we did our job. Ships and naval aviation almost every night mined enemy fairways in the Finnish Skerries, in the Arbenski Strait, and in the eastern part of the Gulf of Riga. These daring actions were successful, stealthy, and without losses. It cost us a lot of trouble to ensure the conduct of our convoys along the routes Tallinn-Kronstadt and Tallinn-Moonsund. We were alarmed by cases of blowing up ships, even when they were following strictly in the keel behind the minesweepers. "What's the matter? Why our minesweepers do not destroy mines?" indignantly asked the fleet commander at the flagship Mineral Captain 3rd Rank AK, Tulinov. He shrugged his shoulders. "We do everything, but for some reason it does not work." Urgently called the best specialists from Leningrad. Captain 1st Rank Ivan Alexeyevich Kiriyev, a great expert in minesweeping, who had sailed on minesweepers back in the First World War, came with them. Having familiarized themselves with all the cases of blowing up the ships following the trawls, the mine gods at once confidently declared Hitlerites use special mines electromagnetic and acoustic. We need special trawls. But let me ask the commander, where can we get such? It turned out that the Maritime Scientific and Technical Committee has long developed domestic electromagnetic and acoustic trawls. They have already been tested and received the highest marks. Now both trawls are being improved, Kiriyev calmly explained. This reference amazed us all. We, it turns out, have good trawls, but we want to make them even better, and meanwhile ships are being blown up and sunk, people are dying. The fleet commander contacted Moscow. A few days later, a wooden trawler with an electromagnetic trawl came to Tallinn. We let it into the very mines. It worked perfectly. The latest magnetic mines exploded far beyond its stern. Soon a second ship came in. There were no more electromagnetic minesweepers yet. If only we'd gotten such wooden boats before the war, they would have saved dozens of ships and hundreds of human lives. We in the headquarters understood perfectly well that the enemy will try to widely use the Arbenski Strait for their maritime transportation. That's why we mined the strait, sent here submarine patrols, kept destroyers in Moonsund, torpedo boats at Mintu Pier, and a squadron of bomber aviation at Kagul airfield on the island of Ezel. The shore-based 180mm battery on the Svorbe Peninsula was also aimed at the strait. Planes of the 73rd Air Regiment were conducting a continuous reconnaissance of the area. I was not once present at the telephone conversations between the fleet commander and the commandant of the island area AB Eliseev. Alexei Borisovich asked Komflot, "How are things in Urban?" The general invariably replied, "Everything is in order. The reconnaissance flew. The enemy has not detected. Observers of our battery are also both watching the strait. Once again check the readiness of torpedo boats and aviation. Do not miss the convoy." A few minutes later, a similar conversation took place on the phone with the new commander of the Fleet Aviation, General M.I. "Samokin," he usually replied. "Do not miss. We will strike." And suddenly on July 12th, the commander of our heavy battery on the peninsula Svorbe, Captain Stiebel, reported that he was shelled by 3 Nazi destroyers. The Nazis fired badly. There were many underflights. Of course, artillery medium-caliber destroyers no damage to the turret battery could not bring. It's like mosquito bites to an elephant. But the very fact alarmed us. Where did our intelligence look? How could this happen? It turns out that on July 11th and 12th, operational air reconnaissance at sea was not conducted, as the entire 73rd Air Regiment was carrying out combat missions on the land front. Not without reason, says the proverb, where there is thin, there is torn. We called General Eliseev. He did not add anything new. He was in a complacent mood. It's no big deal. Destroyers appeared, shot and disappeared from sight. In the afternoon from Kagul airfield, we sent a fighter plane to reconnoitre the strait. We had no other planes that day. Every 10 minutes I call the duty officer on communications and ask if there are no reports from the scout. No, nothing has been heard so far. We look at the map of the Gulf of Riga, as if it could tell us something. Just before dinner, the duty communications officer came running. "There's a big convoy in Urban." Together with the commander read the report. At 15 hours and 35 minutes, the fighter found 42 ships guarded by 8 destroyers, 3 patrol ships and a large number of torpedo and patrol boats. What a rich booty itself climbs into our hands. Pilots report that the duty unit of bombers flew out to bombard. The Svorby Peninsula Battery is firing. It's all wrong. It is necessary to gather all the forces in a fist and strike a decisive blow to the enemy convoy. But the torpedo boats on the island of Isle were not ready to go. 5 destroyers in Moonsund, after a trip to the Urban Strait, take fuel directly from the tanker and will be able to go to sea only at midnight. The commander of the detachment of light forces, Rear Admiral VP Drozd, who was in Tallinn, nervous. He urges the fleet commander to allow immediately go to sea with 2 destroyers, Sterigoshi and Angry. At Kayasa, he will meet the rest of his ships and lead them in an attack on the convoy. Komflot gives the go-ahead. Drozd communicates by radio with all his ships and orders them at 3 hours 30 minutes to be at the rendezvous point. Both destroyers at full steam go to sea. Yes, something to think about. The enemy is detected at 15.35. We at headquarters learned about it 2 hours later, and destroyers from Moonsund will leave only at 4 a.m., in other words, 10 hours after the discovery of the convoy. That's what it means not to have a systematic reconnaissance, secured fleet anchorage, well-organized supply, and communications today did not work well. Fleet commander orders to immediately strike the convoy with all possible forces from the air. 24 bombers took off from the airfield. At 20.00 received a report from the submarine S-102 at Cape Kolkasrags, detected a large convoy. Enemy ships go under the very shore in shallow places. Watching the operator, Captain Lieutenant Ovechkin, putting the convoy's location on the map, Pilipovsky, head of the operations department, said with annoyance, "Cape Kolkasrags is the end of the strait." And I immediately understood Grigory Yefimovich's thought the enemy had already passed the strait. He had only 60 miles to go to Riga, 6-7 hours. Why are the hour hands moving so fast? Time had never flown so fast. Komflot calls the commander of the Air Force every now and then. "Samokin, what do you hear?" "Nothing yet. They're looking." "Where did the convoy go?" Finally, it came a report from the pilots. But one that we least expected. Our planes didn't find the enemy. The bombs were dropped on alternate targets. There's no time to oohing and aahing. The commander orders the pilots to immediately find the convoy and organize a second strike. Now it will involve not only aviation, but also destroyers and torpedo boats. Flew instructions to the Sea Rear Admiral Drozd, General Elisiv on Isle, and General Samokin at his CP. At the second hour of the night, another fighter plane flew out for reconnaissance. The commander and all of us do not leave the map, waiting for news from Elisiv. Why is the scout silent? After all, every minute is precious. Finally appears the duty officer on communications. In his hands he has a telegraph ribbon. Komflot takes it and loudly reads the report of General Elisiv detected a convoy at Cape Mesrags. 4 gunboats went out to attack. How many miles from this cape to Riga? Asks the commander of the duty operator. 30. All mentally calculate, will the convoy have time to take refuge in Riga before it is attacked by our forces? And then time seemed to stumble and stretched slowly. Torpedo boats at sea. In the air bomber aviation. We're waiting for results, and still no results. Finally a call from the island of Isle. Squad torpedo boats under the command of Senior Lieutenant Vladimir Gumanenko 2 hours, looking for the enemy. Still found it, and at 4:00 in the morning, breaking through the strong guard, attacked the enemy ships. He attacked bravely, from short distances. Our boats were damaged, but managed to safely return to the base. Gumanenko reported the sinking of 2 German transports in the area of Cape Mesrags. After the boats left, the convoy was attacked by our bomber aviation. Pilots observed direct hits of bombs and the death of transports and minesweepers. The strikes were carried out in groups of 5 to 9 airplanes. In total, more than 70 airplane sorties were made. The attacks did not stop until the convoy was drawn into the western Dina. It was at 11 hours and 30 minutes, and our destroyers arrived only at 13 hours. One destroyer slipped behind the entrance buoy and fired at the tail of the convoy. After that, Rear Admiral Drozd had nothing else to do but to return to Moonsund. On this day, the Nazis for the first time suffered at sea solid losses. 3 large transports were let down, sunk and severely damaged 25 different small ships. Our pilots shot down 8 enemy planes. However, in general, the actions of our forces, we were dissatisfied. The attack would have been more successful if the bombers hit the convoy not later and before the attack boats, and in general we did not get the interaction of aviation with the ships. Poorly worked intelligence. As a result of all these blunders, some of the enemy ships reached their destination, and there was a full opportunity to send them to the bottom, every last one of them. We thought a lot about it then. Our pilots and boaters fought heroically, and it is not their fault that the case was not brought to the end. After a careful study of the events of the day, we made a number of important decisions. First of all, we tried to improve air reconnaissance of Libava, Vindava and Urbensky Strait. We also revised the communication scheme and simplified it. It was obvious that reports about the enemy should be transmitted immediately to the one who, without waiting for special instructions, can immediately strike. Under our previous scheme, reports went through many instances, and as a result we learned about the enemy last, although the organization of strikes on convoys by different forces largely depended on the fleet headquarters. July 15th. Our mine torpedo aviation put mines directly on the approaches to the mouth of the Daugava. On these mines a few days later blew up a large Nazi tanker. There were more successes, but they could not calm us down. Again and again at the fleet headquarters we discussed the issues of combat interaction. It became obvious that without friendly work with General Elisiv and his staff, we cannot correct the situation. I had to meet with Elisiv and talk about everything. For this purpose, on July 19th, I went to the island of Isle. By car we reached the port of Rohikul. Here we got under heavy bombardment and sat in some pit for about an hour. There was no other shelter. We could not understand what exactly the Nazis were bombing. The already destroyed port? Burnt-out wharf lines? Broken apartment houses and blown-up oil storage tanks? There was charred, twisted iron sticking out everywhere, the smell of burning in the air, not a soul around. And the bombs continued to fall and plough the black, greasy from fuel oil ground. Apparently the plan of Hitler's command today was to bomb Rohikul, and the plan was blindly carried out. As the airplanes left, the noise of the engines died down. A patrol boat cautiously approached the burned pier. With no less caution, and we sneaked to it, jumping from one burnt log to another. As soon as we stepped on the deck, the boat rushed and flew into the strait. Lieutenant Yuri Fyodorovich Azaev managed the ship perfectly. We are carried along the quiet surface of the strait with 20 knots speed. We're approaching the Koivisto wharf. We are moored dashingly. I sincerely admire the skillful, precise work of sailors. As a former destroyer's XO, I'm quite satisfied with it. Thank you, bosun. You have a good mooring crew. I say goodbye to the tall petty officer of the first article. I also say goodbye to the commander, thanking him for the excellent mooring. He smiles broadly. On the shore I am met by the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel A.I. Okitinsky, firmly bunched, taut. We get in the car. I ask to drive slowly, carefully inspecting the terrain. On both sides of the highway is boiling work sailors. Red Army and local residents build pillboxes, bunkers, digging ditches, install hollows. Closer to the coastline erected anti-landing obstacles and urgently completed the battery. General Elisiv's staff correctly aimed its efforts. Soon it is in these bays Hitlerites will try to land their paratroops and with shame will get away. During the whole day I did not see a single person who was not engaged in matters connected with the defense of the island. The natives had organized themselves into building parties. Sailors and soldiers were bringing in and dropping off materials and engineering parts. The clanking of iron, snorting of trucks, blows of shovels and axes, and sometimes muffled explosion sappers were digging into the rocks with the help of Toll. The commander of the coastal defense of the Baltic area, aka the commandant of all the islands, or, as we called him in telegrams, KRBOBR, Major General AB. Ilisiv, an old Baltic sailor Bolshevik, together with Brigade Commissar GF. Zaitsev invested a lot of energy to prepare a worthy response to the enemy. Their labour was not wasted, each island turned into a mighty fortress. The chief of the political department, Regimental Commissar LEE. Kontsov, was of great help to them. The headquarters built a good command post of the field type, with reliable protection from aviation bombs. General Ilisiv met me, took me to his dugout, where there was a small table and 2 benches. Many formation chiefs were not very clear about the staff work and its specifics. They explained all failures and difficulties by the lack of authority of their own or higher headquarters. I had already gotten used to it. No sooner had we settled down at the table than the general began to lay out his grievances. I barely had time to write it down, realizing that until he said everything he had accumulated in his soul, none of our conversations about cooperation, battle management and intelligence will not succeed. Tell the military council that I have very few field troops, not enough anti-aircraft guns, not enough small-caliber artillery to repel landings. Recorded? He asked. I wrote it down. I wrote it down. I answer. But now all the claims have been made. I close the notebook and say, "And now, Comrade General, I have a few questions for you." And I immediately go on the offensive. Tell me, Alexei Borisovich, why did the plane, being in readiness, flew for additional reconnaissance with a great delay, only after our secondary call from the headquarters? Why torpedo boats could not go out immediately on the signal? We approached the purpose of my arrival. We began a heated conversation about the organization and management of the battle, about the interaction of forces, about communication. Brigade Commissar Gavril Fedorovich Zaitsev tried to soften the debate, to bring our points of view closer. Soon we still found a common language. In the end, it was decided the battle, striking the enemy convoy, will henceforth be commanded by one man, the commandant of the islands. All forces allocated to strike the enemy operationally will be subordinate only to him, General Ilisiv. We immediately developed the basic schemes of aerial reconnaissance, direct communication with the ships standing in Moonsund, with submarines which were on patrol duty in urban. Zaitsev was satisfied and, treating me to tea, noted, "I see that the conference at the highest level has come to its happy conclusion." Yes, he was right. I passed AB. Elisiv's claims to Tallinn by telephone. The chief of RIA Moskalenko already in an hour telegraphed the majority of requests will be satisfied. We with Ilisiv toured some parts of the coast. There were still flaws in the anti-landing defence. The general agreed with our comments and immediately gave his staff the necessary orders. We visited batteries and construction sites. On the move, we solved urgent issues. In the evening, I returned to Tallinn. I immediately went to the operational map. I see that the front line has moved away from the city, G.E. Pilipovsky explains. Parts of the 8th Army strengthened and hold positions on the line Parnu-Tartu. During the day, they drove the fascists 20 kilometers to the south. It's quite good. And how are things at sea? The chief of the operations department takes the magazine. Yes, as if it's not bad either. Torpedo boats Captain second-ranked Cherokov and Solomatin made a successful raid and again put mines on the fairways at the Finnish base Porvo. I'm looking at the map. And what are these crosses? I ask the operational duty captain, Lieutenant Ovechkin. Usually rosy-cheeked, fresh as a cucumber, Ovechkin today something greyed, it seems, tired much, but still smiling. It is our boats, already returning. Near Kari Island met 4 enemy patrol boats. 2 of them were sunk. Their graves are marked with crosses. Komflot ordered to pass this place by control trawling, Pilipovsky adds. The enemy may have placed mines there. The necessary orders have already been given. While we were talking, the frantic crackling of anti-aircraft guns began. Shot ships and batteries on the shore. White tulips dotted the blue sky. Fighter planes were screeching. After about 10 minutes everything quieted down, only to start again soon. At precisely defined times, morning and evening, an aerial scout appeared over Tallinn. Just that evening it was shot down by either pilots or anti-aircraft gunners. But it's not important. What is important is that it was shot down. The pilot, who parachuted down, was captured and brought to our headquarters. The sailors from the guards had to work hard to bring the Hitlerite. In one piece on the way there were a lot of people who wanted to treat him to a slap. Here at the interrogation he behaved pathetically and cowardly. He could not tell us anything useful. The results of the measures taken by us were reflected. All convoys in Urban were now detected in time, and crushing blows were dealt to them. Early in the morning of July 26th, the operational duty officer at headquarters reported to me. Again a convoy, but very strange, only 2 transports and guard ships 18. So the transports are carrying some particularly valuable cargo. Fleet commander, listening to the report, thought about the map. The case was complicated by the fact that at this time in the Urbensky Strait, a group of our ships put mine barriers. But there is no bad without good. Taught by bitter experience, we, this time, in addition to aerial reconnaissance mine laying, covered also squadron destroyer. It could also be used to hit the enemy. Aerial reconnaissance sent a timely report. The convoy was detected in the sea on the approach to the Urbensky Strait. Komflot decided to send bombers and torpedo boats under cover of fighters to strike. Urgent dispatches flew to the destroyer at sea, to the aviation headquarters, and to the headquarters on the island of Easel. At our control center calculations were made. It was clarified who, when and where to go. The destroyer was sent to Cape Kolka to intercept the convoy and to continuously monitor it. The same task was assigned to air reconnaissance. It was the continuous tracking of the detected enemy was not enough for us before, and we lost sight of him. Now this did not happen. At 13 hours and 23 minutes, the detachment of torpedo boats Captain Lieutenant S.A. Osipov under cover of fighters left Mintu Wharf on the peninsula Svorby. And since the convoy was under our observation all the time, an hour later the boats easily found it in the area of Ovizi Michelbeck, 2 transports under the protection of 2 destroyers, 8 patrol ships and 8 torpedo boats. Nearby were our mine barriers, so the convoy clung to the shore. Our bombers also quickly found the enemy and struck even before the torpedo boats approached. One Nazi vessel caught fire. It turned out to be a tanker. It burst into flames with a huge fire. Enemy ships broke the formation, slowed down, and it was just what our gunboats needed. The fascists, fighting off the airplanes, saw the boats when they were already very close. They hastily transferred their fire to them. Osipov, using the smoke of the burning tanker, and then his smoke screens, was able to bring the boats to the distance of the torpedo salvo. And at 14 hours and 48 minutes the gunboats rushed into the attack, and the second enemy vessel went down. Great damage was sustained by 2 destroyers and a patrol ship. In addition, our fighters shot down 2 German planes. Now we could say the enemy convoy suffered a complete defeat. That's what means a clear interaction of aviation and ships. Skillful tactical interaction showed the Baltic and August 1st. Air reconnaissance that day timely detected a detachment of 5 fascist ships. Aviation quickly pointed our torpedo boats at the enemy. Captain Lieutenant S.A. Osipov and Senior Lieutenant V.P. Gumanenko attacked the enemy from 9 to 11 cable meters. 2 minesweepers were sunk, and 1 destroyer was badly damaged and barely made it to Riga on a tow. The Battle of August 21st was equally successful. Having timely noticed the enemy convoy, the air scout clearly reported about its place, composition, course and speed. Having received this information, our destroyers Artem and Surovi under the command of Captain 2nd Rank SD. Solukin immediately dropped anchor. In the area of Cape Mazrags they caught up with the convoy, and despite the firing of enemy coastal batteries and raids of junkers, from 50 cable meters they opened fire and set fire to 2 patrol ships. A large self-propelled barge, moving as part of the convoy itself, was thrown onto the coastal rocks. A few days later it was smashed by a storm. During the departure of our ships on them were dropped more than 100 bombs. Continuously maneuvering, destroyers managed to dodge them and safely returned to Moonsund. Thus, although most of the coast of the Gulf of Riga and was in the hands of the enemy, the bay was ours. The enemy was not able to use the sea route for regular transportation and supply of his armies in the Baltic. Meanwhile, our 8th Army continued to withdraw to the northeast. The enemy on July 8th was at a distance of 60 kilometers from Tallinn. He was detained at Marjama. Parts of the 16th Infantry Division, 1st Marine Brigade, detachments of border guards and work battalions. Having created a big advantage in forces, the fascists nevertheless broke through the front and on August 7th came to the shore of the Gulf of Finland near Kunda Bay. The 8th Army was split. Its 11th Rifle Corps was retreating to the east, to Narva, and the 10th Rifle Corps to the west, to Tallinn. Communication with Leningrad we could now maintain only by sea. Back in mid-July, the Military Council of the Navy led the defence of Tallinn. By the decision of the Stavka, the 10th Rifle Corps, which was retreating to Tallinn, numbering only 11,000 men, became subordinate to the Fleet Command, and its commander, Major General I.F. Nikolaev, became the deputy commander of the Fleet for Land Defence. Work on the creation of defensive lines boiled over. It was headed by Colonel Kuzmin, a good engineer and organiser. The Central Committee of the Communist Party and the Council of People's Commissars of Estonia mobilised 25,000 citizens, all construction organisations with their equipment and materials, as well as city transport for the construction. Tallinn's enterprises switched to defence production. An Estonian regiment was formed from volunteer workers. Workers of ship repair shops built a railway battery, and the Estonian Shipping Company built 3 armoured trains. This production of 55mm mortars and mines for them was established at the Kopli factory. The Central Committee of the Communist Party of Estonia, the political department of the fleet, and all fleet political and party organisations launched a wide propaganda work. Not a step back was the motto of the leaflets issued in Russian and Estonian. There were more than enough volunteer sailors who wanted to fight on the land front, and we in the headquarters had to restrain this patriotic impulse so as not to reduce the combat effectiveness of the ships. In total, the fleet sent more than 16,000 sailors to the front near Tallinn. The total number of Tallinn garrison reached, thus, 30,000. Artillery of the fleet actively supported our infantry, fired 200 guns caliber from 76 to 305 millimeters, but they could not replace inland combat tanks, and they were not, and very little was field artillery 1, or 3 barrels per kilometre of the front, the total length of which at that time was 90 kilometres. The fighting was unequal. The enemy concentrated 5 infantry divisions near Tallinn, reinforced by a large number of tanks, artillery and aviation. We were saved by the limitless heroism of soldiers and Estonian workers. The fascists were not losing, and this meant that we, delaying them near Tallinn, grind the enemy forces and thus helped the troops defending Leningrad. During these very tense days, I was summoned by the fleet commander. He was smiling. "Well, Chief of Staff, we will bomb Berlin." "Berlin?" Yes, don't be surprised." We began to develop the operation. Everything was conducted with the strictest secrecy. Our bombers DB3 had such a radius of action that they could fly to Berlin only from the island of Isle, and there we secretly relocated 15 planes of the 1st Mine Torpedo Regiment. And how to deliver bombs and gasoline to the island? We decided to use minesweepers, but there was a fear that the enemy would intercept them on the way. Someone expressed a bold idea to send ships without any security, as they usually go, checking the fairways. All responsibility for the secret loading of barrels of gasoline and air bombs was assigned to the Chief of Staff of the Kronstadt base, Captain 2nd Rank FV. Zuzulia. Only a few people knew about what was on board the minesweepers. Even the duty service of the headquarters in Kronstadt and Tallinn were not privy to this secret. Operators watched the passage of minesweepers, not even suspecting what a responsible task these small ships perform. Time stretches slowly. We, of course, do not sleep. At night, the operational duty captain 3rd Rank VI, Andreev, came to me and said, "I do not understand anything. Fleet commander has twice called me with a map and was interested in these 2 minesweepers. Now you ask, what's the matter, Comrade Chief of Staff? We have minesweepers every day." I don't remember exactly what I answered Andreev and whether he was satisfied, but the questions about the place of minesweepers he was asked at night more than once by Conflot, me and the chief of rear, 3 people who knew what the matter was. And when I finally read the report of the minesweeper commander Senior Lieutenant N.S. Dibalov in the morning at 8.00 gave anchor, it seemed to me that I even heard the rumble of the anchor chain in the distant bay of the island of Ezel, and this rumble was sweeter for me than any music. The second minesweeper patron was also safely brought by the commander, Senior Lieutenant MP. Efimov. Everything was done secretly and in time. And on the night of August 8th, 15 heavy planes took to the air. They were commanded by the regiment commander, skillful pilot Kol. Preobrazhensky, his navigator, was Captain P.I. Koklov, group commanders Captains V.A. Grekishnikov, I.Y. Efremov and M.M. Plotkin. They flew in very difficult weather conditions, first over the sea, then over the enemy territory. The pilots appeared minute by minute exactly according to the plan over Berlin, shining with myriads of lights, and dropped bombs on military facilities. They accomplished their task and returned safely to the airfield. The raid was completely unexpected for the Nazis. The raids continued in September. During the first 9 bombing raids, our pilots dropped 311 bombs. This was our answer to the Hitlerites' attempts to bomb Moscow. It was also the answer to Goebbels' propaganda, which had long ago proclaimed that all Soviet aviation had been destroyed. The strikes on Berlin were of great importance. The fascists were persistently climbing towards Leningrad and Moscow, and at the same time Baltic pilots were bombing the fascist lair itself. While we reach Berlin by air, but in time we will get there by land. Joyfully, said our people. The strikes on Berlin gave new strength for the long and difficult struggle. We warmly congratulated the pilots on the awarding them the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. And the situation near Tallinn worsened day by day. The troops were fighting hard, exhausting battles. We had no reserves. Ammunition was running out. In the air there was an unrelenting rumble of artillery cannonade. On August 20th, the fascists across the front went on the offensive against the city. Fierce fighting did not stop day or night. In these most critical days there was a meeting of the Military Council of the Fleet. It was clear that we have little strength. To contain the enemy, we decided to use all the reserves. In particular, we sent to the front all the employees of the Pubalta, political workers of coastal units and institutions of the fleet. So we recruited more than 200 people. It was a huge force. Their authority, the ability to inspire and lead people, rectified the situation in many areas. The former professor of the Leningrad University Regimental, Commissar Orest Veniaminovich Tsiknovitsa, went to the front line. We used to know him as a man of extraordinary erudition, an excellent lecturer. And this intellectual and scientist found himself in the place where the enemy was making 15 to 20 attacks a day. In the battle, the commissar of the battalion was killed. Tsiknovitsa took his place. He led the soldiers in a counterattack, and the enemy fell back, and so on and so forth. The battalion held the line until it received the order to withdraw. Regimental commissars N.A., Gribenshikov and S.A. Krasnikov replaced the out-of-service regimental commanders. The same bravely acted near Tallinn instructors of the political department Battalion Commissar Ioselev and senior political officer Ilya Igolkin, writer Anatoly Tarasenkov, military correspondent of Pravda Nikolai Mikhailovsky. They were with the soldiers of the cover groups in Kadriorg Park when the main forces of the garrison were already being loaded onto ships, and they did what communists should do. They were there where the fiery party word was needed most of all. August 26th, 6 o'clock in the morning. During the night repulsed strong attacks on the city. The enemy is infiltrating in small groups into the suburbs. All airfields are occupied by the enemy. Our aviation flew to the east. The fleet and the city are under bombs and shells. The beautiful Pirita is burning. Other suburbs are burning. Our BFCP in Mine Harbour is under fire all the time, is my last entry in the Tallinn diary. Stavka gave the order to break through the fleet to Kronstadt and evacuate the Tallinn garrison. It was not so easy for 2 days to arrange on various berths of the port large transports, to load on them more than 23,000 people and about 66,000 tons of different valuable property, to plan the order of movement of almost 200 different ships. All this was done under heavy artillery fire. The enemy was already shelling the port. It was necessary to provide a lot of things, and above all that the enemy did not break into the city and the port on the shoulders of the retreating parts. This did not happen. The landing of troops was organised under the cover of heavy fire of ships and coastal batteries. Early in the morning of August 28th, the fleet left Tallinn. A lot has been written about the breakthrough of the fleet, about the heroism of our sailors and commanders. I told about it in detail in my book Seafront. There is no sense to repeat all this. I will remind the reader only the most important circumstances of transition. The Gulf of Finland is comparatively not wide. Besides, it abounds with big and small islands, reefs, stone banks, shoals. Therefore, the general course of the ship's movement, say from Tallinn to Kronstadt, was always predetermined by the geography itself, which cannot be argued with. The fleet had to pass 321 kilometres, and most of the way under the continuous influence of enemy aviation and artillery, as both coasts were in the hands of the enemy. There were his airfields, and on the capes stood batteries. About 125 kilometres of the way lay through a minefield consisting of more than 4,000 mines. To force it required at least 100 minesweepers, and there were 25 of them. And since all our aviation due to the lack of airfields flew to the east, the armada of ships went without air cover. With bitterness we left Tallinn. During its defence the fleet fired 549 rounds at the enemy, releasing more than 13,000 shells. Thousands of sailors defended our old fleet revel Tallinn with their chests on the land front. And now we have to leave this dear city. Goebbels' propaganda hastened to announce on the same day that the entire Soviet Baltic fleet had been destroyed in Tallinn. But our ships persistently went forward. As the first deputy conflot, I followed on the leader Minsk with the second echelon of the fleet headquarters. The sun had just set, and the sky seemed to have gone away from us, covered with a dark veil. It was no longer dangerous. Having flown enough for a day, fascist pilots returned to their airfields. Now the mines were waiting for us, and all the attention of signallers and lookouts was focused on the surface of the sea. Any object on the water, a barrel, a box seemed to be a mine, and the ships manoeuvred, trying not to hit it. And there were a lot of objects floating by a broken dinghy, broken furniture. Here floated a life preserver with the inscription "Control Room Crab." Ahead on the course of a bright flash, and then a large copper-coloured flame. It goes out fast. Clearly someone's been blown up. It's not the first time. 20 torpedo boats on the left. They're coming at us, loudly reported the signalman. 5 fascist boats were flying along the darkening water surface in a ledge formation, with their broad, blunt bows high up. Far off to the sides, white storms seemed to be the wings of large birds soaring low over the sea. The commanders raised their binoculars to their eyes. There was silence on the bridge. Everyone waited for the command. I remembered the peaceful days when, during the exercises, standing sometimes on the bridge of the target ship, looking into the evening twilight and worried, what if our boats do not find the target? Or even worse, they will find it, but torpedoes will miss. And how we all rejoiced when the foamy trace of a torpedo passed under the keel of the ship. All over the upper deck rumbled, "Well done." Boatmen, it was like that not so long ago. And now the gunboats are bringing doom. The commander of the leader, having lowered his binoculars, turns to me. "Comrade Chief of Staff, permission to open fire. Shooting from a great distance means to reduce the chances of success. Misses will inevitably make the gunners nervous. No, we must wait and shoot for sure. I'm ordering you. Let's get closer." Senior Artilleryman S.A. Volkov gives settings on the guns. Everything is ready. Silence on the bridge, silence at the guns. We listen to the rangefinder's reports, 90, 85, 80 cable meters. The distance is rapidly decreasing. 65 cable meters. Almost, shouts the rangefinder. I wave my hand, and at once the leader's 130 clicks rang out. A couple of minutes later, the guns of the destroyer Soon, which was coming to our keel, began to talk. In peaceful days, when guns opened fire during exercises, we usually plugged our ears with absorbent cotton. Admittedly, like many navigators, I was not particularly fond of artillery firing. How welcome the deafening salvos seemed to me now. I stood not far from the cannon. The shock wave was hurting my face, but I kept my binoculars on, watching only the boats. Underflight. Again underflight. And why are the guns firing so slowly? The artilleryman calmly gives commands. Well done. And the Nazi boats are still coming at us. They're about to fire torpedoes. The commander of the ship, Captain 2nd Rank PN. Petunin is already commanding watch the torpedoes carefully, but his words are drowned out by a powerful twin explosion. Black chips are flying in an orange cloud, all that is left of the boat. Where are the others? Blinded by the flash of the explosion, we don't find them right away. Surrounded by the bursts of our shells, they flee hard to the north. Hurrah rumbles through the ship. We're not the only ones shouting. Hurrah comes from the destroyer soon, people on its deck waving their hands, marveling at our victory. Joy reigns on the ship. Only talk about the boats driven away. After all, they were carrying 10 torpedoes. This would have been enough not only for our Minsk, but also for our neighbours. Soon the joy is again replaced by anxiety. We were surrounded by the night, dark and damp. Every now and then we hear the sound of explosions. It's the ships bumping into mines. We're anchored, and the mines, torn off the mineshafts, float and float. Black in the dark water, they are distinguishable only when they come close to the board. Never forget the fearlessness of our sailors. Seeing a mine approaching, they throw themselves into the cold, gloomy water and with their hands pull the terrible horned ball aside. There were cases when, finding themselves in the water after the loss of their ship, sailors held on to the mine for hours and swam with it, warning of the danger to other ships. In this heroism and laid the foundations of our coming victory. On August 29th at 17:00, the warships of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet anchored at the big Kronstadt roadstead. The very next day, the powerful guns of the fleet crushed the fascists who were tearing towards Leningrad. Army and navy units that arrived from Tallinn went to the land front and joined the ranks of the heroic defenders of the city of Lenin. The fascists were capturing our bases, and we were forced to retreat together with the army. But the German fleet never ventured into the waters of the Gulf of Finland to support their army. The Nazis solved the maritime problems of the war by land forces. Our navy and army have always acted shoulder to shoulder. And now, coming to Kronstadt, the fleet was entering a new stage of the struggle with the Nazis, joining the direct defence of Leningrad. The situation on the land front was very difficult. On the Karelian direction, the enemy, having broken through the front, was advancing on Leningrad. We left Vyborg. Ships of the Skerry detachment provided active fire support to our land units. Powerful guns of line ships, the famous Fort Krasnaya Gorka and other forts of the Kronstadt fortress, as well as ships standing in the Neva River and the Neva Bay, were firing at the fascists. The rumble of cannonade did not subside day or night. The fleet formed from its men marine rifle brigades and immediately sent them to the front. But the enemy pressed on. In the offices of the darkened headquarters stuffy, I signed the documents for another mine laying on the approaches to the coastal flanks of our armies and went out into the headquarters garden to breathe the night coolness. However, almost after me from the door of the headquarters flew out of the Arrow Petty Officer First Article Ivakin, my orderly from the beginning of the war. Comrade Chief of Staff, you are urgently required by the fleet commander. Jumping up the stairs, I ran upstairs. Conflot is leaning over a land map. The front headquarters received information that our 2 infantry divisions retreating from under Vyborg are surrounded and now with difficulty go ashore in Koivisto Bay. The fascists are pressing them to the water. There's no communication with the divisions. They are somewhere here. Vice Admiral drew a pencil on the map, a large circle between Koivisto and Maxlati. Is that clear? Admittedly, there was no clarity, and I was in no hurry to answer. Conflot continued. The front commander ordered to gather both divisions in Koivisto and urgently deliver them to Leningrad by sea. This operation is entrusted to you. Is that clear? Yes, sir. The task is clear. I could only reply. The task was indeed clear, but where the divisions are it is not clear at all, because the whole coast is occupied by the fascists, and what forces the enemy has there, We do not know. So it is possible to fall into the clutches of the fascists. We estimate we'll need 6 to 7 big transports. We still need to find them. I agree with my assistants that I and the task force immediately go to Koivisto to clarify the situation on the spot, and the transports will come there later. I put the management of preparation and dispatch of ships on my new deputy FV, Zozulia, who became captain of the first rank. The difficulty was that almost all the transports that came from Tallinn needed repairs. In the headquarters, called the head of the technical department of the rear of the fleet engineer captain second rank NN, Kudinov, and the head of the Kronstadt naval plant engineer captain first rank BM, Volosatov. I asked them, "Can you send transports to Koivisto in 24 hours? Apparently they wanted to say the terms are unacceptable, but having understood the task, they sighed and said that they would do their best. And indeed, afterwards we learned that the transports were hastily repaired and released to the sea in time. On September 1st, early in the morning, we set out on a hunter boat. There was a lazy but still large ripples in the bay. Visibility was excellent, the sky with small clouds. The forecast didn't promise deteriorating weather. So it is necessary to take care of air cover. I contacted Kronstadt, agreed with aviators to keep fighters ready. The boat developed 18 knot speed. Every now and then its nose was bumping into the wave, and the forward-looking sailor was splashed with water from head to toe. To watch for mines, the commander appointed the most eye and fastest sailors, placing them on the sides and on the bow. As the chief of the marching staff with me went Captain second rank Nikolai Georgievich Bogdanov, former commander of the destroyer. He does not occupy knowledge and experience, and it suited me very well. I remember there was an alarming shout of a forward-looking sailor. "There's a mine on the course." Bogdanov raised his big mine, bearing binoculars to his eyes. The boat, strongly tilted, was already turning away. Nikolai Georgievich grumbled angrily. "Stand down. It's a barrel." And so it was more than once. But I invariably encouraged the lookouts. "Well done, guys. You should see everything at sea. It is better to go around 100 barrels than to miss one mine." One of the sailors answered cheerfully, "Comrade Rear Admiral, we saw more mines than kegs during the passage from Tallinn." My marching staff also included Colonel M.A. Zernov, the Chief of Fleet Communications, a small stature, overweight, as I have already said, always imperturbable man, which helped well in his hectic work. A knowledgeable specialist, he enjoyed well-deserved authority in the fleet. Not reacting to any reports about mines, the colonel immediately sat down in the radio room, checking the material part and documentation of radio communication. "Everything is in order," he reported to me. He got out of the cramped enclosure with difficulty. "The guys here are knowledgeable. They are in their 5th year of service. They were to be demobilized in the fall." Zernov loved his signalers and spoke of them as if they were his own sons. He was a good educator. It is not by chance that after the war M.A. Zernov became the head of the Naval Communications School and left a good memory of himself there. Another officer of my marching staff was Captain second rank Ivan Nikolaevich Gontsov, the head of the Military Communications Department of the fleet. All masters of the merchant and fishing fleet were subordinate to him in military matters. And first of all, the Baltic State Shipping Company with its large fleet. "Well, Ivan Nikolaevich, will your ships arrive on time?" I asked him. He immediately became animated. He began to explain why such and such steamship does not cause him any doubts, and such can fail, and the crew cannot be blamed. After all, they're after a hard Tallinn crossing. You understand? We are on the traverse of Stursuddon Lighthouse. The observation post quickly responded to our call signs. "That's good, it means the enemy hasn't gotten here yet. We're clinging to the shore. It looks completely deserted. Not a soul near the rare houses. North of the lighthouse is also unusually dead. The Björksund Strait is extremely picturesque. The shore is flanked by tall pine trees, and yellow sandy beaches stretch by the water. The village of Koivisto is set on the shore of a horseshoe-shaped green bay. Small and clean buildings were drowned in greenery, and a Kirke with a thin Gothic spire towered above them. It was visible from the sea for tens of miles, and always served us as a good landmark. Koivisto Bay is dear to me from my childhood memories. I sailed here a lot on different sailing boats. In summer, a whole flotilla of yachts would gather in this bay. From here, from Koivisto, all sport sailing trips on Finnish skerries up to the Gulf of Bothnia started. But I also remembered other things, the harsh time of the Civil War and the intervention. In the Björkesund Strait, as the reader already knows, the British squadron was based at that time and supported the White General Udnik, who was attacking Petrograd. From here, English torpedo boats raided Kronstadt. However, the interventionists soon had to leave in disgrace. Well, the time will come, and the fascists will be chased away from here, I thought, looking at such familiar and favourite shores. On the roadstead of Koivisto stood 2 of our gunboats, armoured boats and landing barges of the Skerry group of ships. It was quite an impressive artillery force. The gunboats had 130mm guns. From the commander of the Skerry's brigade, Captain 3rd Rank Lazo, we learned that the personnel of the Vyborg fortified sector of coastal defence and a special detachment of sailors covering the withdrawal of 2 divisions from Vyborg had already been delivered to Bjorki Island, and a circular defence had been established there. Captain 2nd Rank Bogdanov contacted the commander of the artillery division. Batteries were ready to cover our transportation with fire, but no one knew where the fascists and our troops were. From Kronstadt reported that the patrol ships found nothing suspicious in the sea and that 2 transports have already left the port of Leningrad. Gontsov became animated. So, they will come at night. We moored at the pier. The shore was empty. Probably the soldiers are hiding in the woods. We sent sailors there. Soon several army commanders appeared on the pier. They didn't know where their headquarters were. They looked gloomy, exhausted. Their voices were hoarse. I asked, "Do you have many wounded? Where are they?" They answered almost in unison, "A lot. All the huts are full, and they are still lying in the woods." I informed them of the purpose of my arrival and ordered them to urgently look for someone from the divisional command. Every minute is precious. It began to get dark. Behind the woods the glow of fires was blazing. Shooting was heard. Arrived the commander of the 115th Division, General V.F. Konkov, with the remnants of the headquarters and political department. The commander, a Red Army officer, short in stature, dense, kept cheerfully, overcoming fatigue. He was taught, gave orders short and clear. We quickly drew up a plan of action. First of all, we need to organize a cover for the withdrawal, for which to allocate the most capable units. Accompanying the division commander officers rushed to fulfill the order. "But I have no guns or tanks," said the commander. "Nothing. We have guns on the ships. We will support." We agreed to load the wounded first, then the rest of the soldiers. The commander says that he and his staff will be the last to leave the pier together with us. We agreed on a lot of things, but some things we did not take into account. In an hour the pier was filled not only with wounded, but also with healthy soldiers. Someone fell into the water in the crowd. Captain 2nd Rank Bogdanov arranged the sailors and with the help of army commanders quickly set up the commandant's service. In the darkness came the first transport. It moored at the pier. In the droning silence, shooting behind the forest seemed very close, unnerving. The soldiers of the commandant's service were not easy to maintain order on the pier. Loading began. Announced that after the wounded, the turn will reach everyone, but only those who kept their personal weapons will be allowed on the ship. In the darkness we heard warm words, shouts. "And where to get it, the weapon?" "And where you left it, you can take it there," the sailors at the gangway answered nonchalantly. "You'll make it to the steamer in time. We'll wait for you." The commander of the division quickly formed companies. Many soldiers were separated from their units. There were few commanders, some were wounded, others died in the fighting. Often the company was led by a junior commander and led it to the landing. Loading was fast and organized. Sometimes even heard jokes and laughter, and away from the pier huddled gloomy soldiers, those who were without weapons. I approached them. "Comrade Admiral, we have not lost our weapons for good. We are not to blame, we were in battle. I felt sorry for the boys. I was about to allow them to land when 2 or 3 of them rushed into the forest. Soon they came back with a machine gun or a rifle. I remember a young fighter running, catching up with the company going to the pier, and shouting, "Brothers, I've got a ticket for the steamship," and shows a machine gun, although without a disc. The transport is already full. But where is the second one? Gontsov is nervous. There are still thousands of people on the shore. And suddenly I receive a report at the entrance to the Byorky Strait the transport exploded on a mine and sank. We were getting discouraged. Captain First Rank Zojuli's radiogram cheered us up another transport was sent to replace the lost one. At night it moored at the pier. Quickly load it too. The commander reported that with darkness the fascists weakened the pressure from the front. Suspicious maybe they're bypassing the bay. I proposed to finish the evacuation before dawn, before the enemy reconnaissance flew in. But the third transport, the largest, turning around at the roadstead, ran aground. The captain demands tugs. Ivan Nikolaevich Gontsov rages on the bridge of the ill-fated steamer, but the captain is adamant give him a tugboat, and basta. We had to send Bogdanov to help Gontsov. Bogdanov had a short conversation. He simply told the captain that in 3 hours the fascists would be here and that he did not intend to give them the ship, and therefore the transport would have to be blown up. The captain did not expect such a turn of events and asked for at least some boat to be able to anchor. The boat was found, and by dawn the transport stood at the pier, taking another regiment with equipment. The captain personally supervised the loading, hurried the soldiers and himself placed them in the holds and cabins. During the night other transports came up and took the soldiers without delay. In the darkness we did not dare to go to sea, we were afraid of mines. We stood on the roadstead. When it dawned, machine gun and rifle shooting intensified in the forest. Ships' anti-aircraft guns slammed a fascist reconnaissance plane was circling above us. We did not wait for him to call his bombers. Requested the promised help from our aviators. Soon 2 of our fighters appeared, chased away the scout and began to patrol over the raid. How happy everyone was at once. This is a great thing, support from the air. The transports quietly dropped anchors and left the bay. Gunboats were docked at the pier. Their task is to take on board the covering units. Waiting. And the pier is gradually filling up with civilians. They are peasants from the surrounding villages, already occupied by the enemy. Our Tallinn experience told us that it always happens like this. New passengers appear at the last minute. And you can't leave them here. We must take them. The last transport has disappeared behind the cape, and armoured guard boats are rushing after it. And women with children and old men are coming out of the forest. We take them on board and make them comfortable. At last, the Red Army men in sweat-wet uniforms showed up. Some of them are wounded. On fresh bandages, scarlet blood. These are the soldiers of the cover. Sailors help them climb on deck. The shore is deserted. Overcrowded cannon boats are letting go of their moorings. "Well, Admiral," as if everything is in order, says the division commander cheerfully. Leaving a few boats just in case, we also give the moorings in the evening. Just turned around, we see a big dog rushing along the shore. He ran to the end of the pier and howled desperately. A young snub-nosed sailor signalman excitedly reported to the boat commander. "Comrade Senior Lieutenant, there's a dog on the pier, asking to be taken aboard." Voices were heard on the deck. "We must take it. It's our dog," from the canal boat. We had to go back to the pier. From a distance of a few meters, the dog jumped on the boat's tank. He squealed with joy and caressed every sailor. "You won't, bitch, go Owel," joked the soldiers. We're sailing through the strait. All around is silence. Here comes Stir Sudden. We raise our call signs. We've been carrying them for 5 minutes. No answer. Zernov is nervous. Are the slackers asleep? It can't be. An experienced senior enlisted man is there. We come a little closer. Suddenly a white pillar grows not far from us, and a sharp clap is heard. A shell of relatively small caliber, either a field gun or a tank. At the same time, a machine gun rattled. Everything is clear. The communication post and the lighthouse are occupied by the fascists. The boat rushed away from the shore and lay on the same course. We heard the signal dinner for the crew. The XO invites us to the wardroom. The guests were let forward. They hardly mastered the narrow vertical gangway. "Comrade Admiral," exclaimed the division commander, looking around the cramped but cosy cabin. "Yes, you have here, as in a good restaurant. And we can't remember when we had a normal lunch, and we haven't seen hot food for a long time." Hearing this, the messenger sailor treated the greying commander and his companions with special, I would say, filial affection. The table was set in the usual ship's manner: white tablecloth, cutlery, glasses, and a decanter with vodka, according to the wartime ration. As they say, the dinner was held in a friendly, cordial atmosphere, and, I note, with repeated addition of our Navy borscht. We overtook all the transports. On their decks there is no place to fall an apple. The soldiers had been through a lot for the last days, and still the cheerful harmonics were heard from the ships. Here it is, unbending, unflappable, our Soviet soldier. Kronstadt from the sea seemed a grandiose ship coming at us. It lit up with bright flashes. The heavy guns of the northern forts were firing on the Karelian Isthmus, and battleships and cruisers were hitting the area south of Oranienbaum. On our right, the guns of Krasnaya Gorka were pounding heavily. On both banks in the enemy's position fires were blazing. Black smoke was rising high up the wall. In the air there was a silent rumble. The fleet was crushing the fascists, helping their army. The commander and I stood silently on the deck. "Great firing, Kronstadt," he said with admiration. And a deep faith was in our souls. All failures are temporary. The time will come, and the enemy will be defeated. From under the very nose of the fascists, the fleet transferred 27,000 soldiers to Leningrad. It was a great help to the front. In total, more than 28,000 people were evacuated from the Karelian Isthmus together with the wounded and civilian population. There was nobody left in Koivisto. The last boats came to Kronstadt without passengers. September 1941 was tense for us. The fascists were tearing towards Leningrad. 400 barrels of naval artillery of caliber from 152 to 406 mm helped our infantry to repel enemy attacks. And not only by the fire of naval guns we assisted our valiant army. In September, about 30,000 more sailors went ashore to the new naval brigades being formed. In total, 83,000 Baltic sailors fought on the shore. On September 4th, the fascists began daily shelling, and from September 8th, an aerial bombardment of Leningrad. September 8th is also considered the first day of the blockade, because the Germans captured Schlisselburg, and thus the encirclement of the city from the land was completed. We had only one way to communicate with the country, through the stormy Lake Ladoga. The first raid of fascist aviation was hard for Leningrad. The enemy dropped 6,327 incendiary bombs. They caused 178 fires in different parts of the city. A lot of destruction was also caused by 48 high explosive bombs, each weighing 250 to 500 kilograms. With a heavy heart, we looked from the headquarters tower at the flames raging over Leningrad. One after another we heard explosions. Our native city was burning. The fascists went on the offensive along the whole front, from the north, from the south, from the east, where they tried to cross the Neva River at the section Porogi-Shamatevka. With great difficulty, all these attacks were repulsed. The fascists hysterically yelled that the Baltic fleet of the Russians no longer existed, and the Swedish press, with the calmness of an outside observer, reported on the appearance of Soviet submarines near Tallinn, near the island of Somers. And it was true, the M97 and M77 had gone to sea from Kronstadt for reconnaissance. By mid-September, the fascists had broken through to the shore of the Gulf of Finland in the area of Peterhof-Strelna. Now the entire sea canal, the only way to maintain communication between Kronstadt and Leningrad, was viewed and shot at by the enemy. A new complication was created for us. Back in August, our aviation put mines on narrow Finnish fairways in skerries according to a specially developed plan. Torpedo boats also put mines according to the same plan. And here in the hard days of September, the commander of the fleet aviation, General Samokin, calls me on the phone. What, you do not congratulate the aviation? because on our mines blew up and drowned the Finnish coastal defence battleship Ilmarinen. On the same occasion I was approached by boatmen. They were convinced that it was their mines that killed the battleship Ilmarinen near Ute Island. We argued for a long time, though the argument was pointless. The mine was primarily ours, Baltic, and it worked well. The chief of the political department of the fleet, Divisional Commissar VA, Lebedev, in the past a teacher, a highly educated political officer, an intellectual in the highest sense of the word, often came to our headquarters and always reported something new and encouraging. He told us how our sailors were fighting, how persistently our heroic pilots were attacking the fascists. Sometimes you listen to him and involuntarily come to the thought, that's it, tomorrow fascists will be kaput. Alas, kaput did not come soon enough, but Nachpibolt's optimism helped us in difficult days, and I liked to listen to him. On September 15th, the fascists were in 10 kilometers from the city. Hot fights did not subside neither on the ground nor in the air. From the explosions of bombs and shells rocked the ground, but Leningrad and Kronstadt stoically held on. Starting from September 16th, the fascists began to bombard the ships in harbours and on raids. Apparently they were badly hindered by the fleet destroyed by them more than once. On September 19th, the fascists began to bomb Kronstadt. The first raid did not cause us any significant damage, but the subsequent raids, which involved up to 250 airplanes, brought a lot of trouble to the city and the fleet. Soon the Nazis began to bombard Kronstadt from heavy guns installed on the southern shore behind Oranienbaum. The fleet headquarters and the military council had to move outside the city to the barracks of coastal defence units in the western part of Kronstadt. We did it in time, because the next day the building of the fleet headquarters was riddled with shrapnel. The window panes together with the frames flew out on the sidewalk. The boat M97 returned from the sea. Captain Lieutenant AI. Malnikov scouted the area in detail and at the same time sank a fascist transport on the Tallinn roadstead. On the basis of analysing the reconnaissance data produced by our little ones, it was decided to prepare for action on the enemy's sea communications 15 submarines. This caused great enthusiasm among submariners. They were eager to fight. They wanted to strike the enemy again and again. At party meetings, communists consulted on how to better and more reliably prepare for the campaign material part. The Chief of Staff of the Submarine Brigade LA, Kernikov, said, "Well, at last, we are standing in the harbour and waiting for the Nazis to hit us with a shell or a bomb. In the sea and safer, and will be good for the cause." Lev Andreevich was right. Submarines in harbours or even on Kronstadt raids were really vulnerable. The headquarters had outlined in the first place the exit of 5 submarines. Among them was the submarine Sheich 320 Captain Lieutenant IM Vishnevsky. She sank a transport in the southern Baltic. It was not easy to achieve this victory, because the convoy was on a shallow place. We learned about it even before Vishnevsky's return, from the press of neutral countries, which, mocking the imaginary domination of the Germans in the Baltic, assured readers that the southern Baltic swarmed with Soviet submarines. I can't help but recall our first Baltic Red Banner submarine Sheich 323. It received a high award on January 17, 1942. The boat was commanded by an experienced submariner, a participant of the war with the White Finns, Lieutenant Captain F.N. Avantsov. Leaving October 10th from Kronstadt, Sheich 323 repeatedly forced minefields. In the Baltic, Avantsov persistently searched for the enemy, and found. October 16th in the evening he sank a Nazi tanker. The second half of October in the Baltic was stormy. The wind sometimes reached 10 points, breeding fall heavy waves, and so the boat's vertical rudder failed. This meant that the ship became unmanageable. It was necessary to take advantage of the darkness and urgently fix the damage. Working more than an hour in icy water, the Communist Chief Petty Officer MNN, Vinyukov and Komsomol member Red Fleet KV, Podgora coped with the task and fixed the vertical rudder. The combat campaign continued. The submariners sent 2 more large enemy ships to the bottom. Till the Ice Age, our submarines were sinking fascist ships. At the end of September, Hitler's troops storming Leningrad were stopped. they began to entrench, to pass to defence. Remaining in the rear, heroically held under the blows of the enemy, our naval base Hanko, under the command of Lieutenant General S.I. Kabanov and his faithful battle companions Divisional Commissar A.L. Ruskin, Chief of Staff Captain 2nd Rank PG. Maximov, Chief of Staff Captain 2. G. Maximov, Chief of Political Department Regimental Commissar PI. Vlasov, as well as many illustrious commanders of units Major General IN. Dmitriev, Captain BM. Granin, Captain 2nd Rank MD. Polygaev. Kankovtsi kept the enemy in extreme tension, managing not only to withstand, but also to occupy 19 surrounding islands. Fascists repeatedly tried to storm the base, but all their attempts were in vain. Hanko turned into an impregnable fortress. Worse were our affairs in Moonsund. Having started the attack on the islands from the mainland in the first days of September, the fascists landed on the island of Muhu on October 13th. It was not possible to help our units on Easel and Dago in those days, and we had to leave these islands. On September 27th, the fascists bombed Kronstadt for the last time. Having failed to achieve their goal, having decided, probably, that the game was not worth the candle, they left it alone. The fleet and the fortress stood firm, and their fire continued to crush the enemy hordes, tearing towards Leningrad. Former Fleet Commander Admiral V.F. Tributes and a member of the Military Council of the KBF Vice Admiral N.K. Smirnov, in their memoirs, which have seen the light of day in recent years, speak of the fleet headquarters as a well-built, friendly team. This is probably true, but such an organization does not come by itself. It was achieved by the tireless work of staff commanders, with the active participation of the party organization and the Commissioner of Fleet Headquarters Leonid Vasilievich Serebranikov. He appeared in the most intense period of the defense of Tallinn. Always taught, with a firm, balanced character, Leonid Vasilievich began not with criticism and denial of everything that had been done before him, as it often happens, but very tactfully and imperceptibly entered the course of our life. And in a few days it seemed to me and the staff workers that we together with the Commissar served a long time ago. He had a keen interest in our work. He read all operational documents and telegrams. Sometimes Leonid Vasilievich would look at a paper we had prepared and say to me, "Listen, please read this place. Something here is not all right." I reread the document, found a flaw and gratefully accepted the Commissar's remark. It is known that any forced withdrawal under the onslaught of the enemy generates neuroses in all levels of leadership, and especially where there are unstable, irascible people. Serebranikov in any situation was firm, cool-blooded, and his calm judgments quickly extinguished the flashes in the sun. Remarkable qualities possessed our Commissar of the Staff. It is not by chance that a year later he received a new high appointment. He became the head of the political department of the Ladoga military flotilla. We had to pay a lot of attention to Ladoga. Ladoga military flotilla was subordinate to the commander of the Baltic fleet at that time. Battles were already going on the shores of the lake. The enemy ring around Leningrad was closing. Communication with the country was maintained mainly only through Ladoga. Back in the summer, the Baltic fleet sent to Ladoga 6 gunboats equipped from self-propelled shalloons, which used to carry the soil raised by dredgers. These vessels of displacement up to 1,000 tons and with a speed of no more than 7 knots were armed with 300mm or 230mm guns. In addition to the cannon boats, the fleet transferred to Ladoga patrol ship Perga, minesweepers, converted from small and not very seaworthy tugboats, such as Iziorets, and other small ships. The oldest Baltic destroyer Sibirski Strelok, left from the First World War, rearmed and renamed now as Constructor, has been preserved on the lake. At first the flotilla did not have its own aviation and anti-aircraft units. There were a lot of things to do. The rear base of the flotilla in Schlisselburg was being created anew, but it was soon under attack. The 4th Marine Brigade was urgently formed from sailors, parts of which entered the battle on the outskirts of Schlisselburg. The northern detachment of ships of the flotilla, it was commanded by Captain 3rd Rank EIT. Salagin evacuated Leningrad women and children, wounded soldiers, brought ammunition and replenishment to our fighting divisions, supported them with their fire. Salagin, now Captain 1st Rank, Doctor of Naval Sciences, once told me. You can imagine we had to drive the ships through skerries between islands already occupied by the enemy. You go through a narrow, straight silence. And suddenly from both sides frantic machine gun and mortar fire. Where to go? One way out forward, full speed. We shoot back from both sides. And then there's aviation. Fortunately, the Germans didn't bomb badly. Finally, we've skipped the strait, we hurry to the shore, and there are German tanks. Our artillerymen engage them in a duel, drive them into the forest. And passengers are already waiting for us on the cape. No moorings. We stick to the shore, lower the gangways and take on board women and children. And all this in full view of the enemy. Every voyage was expensive, but still, we saved thousands of people. In one of the voyages, Saladin and his navigator Popini were wounded, but remained on the bridge until they brought the ships to the base. More than once that fall Ladoga landed paratroops in the rear of the fascists. Not all of them were successful, but they kept the enemy in constant tension and already played their role. Battles for Schlisselburg broke out. The city was defended by units of the 1st NKVD Rifle Division, 1 battalion of the 4th Marine Brigade, and small units of the flotilla. The fleet supported them by the fire of ships standing on the Neva. On September 6th, Nazi bombs destroyed the flotilla headquarters building. Management of ships and units was broken. The headquarters crossed to the right bank of the Neva River in the area of Osinovets Lighthouse. On September 8th, our troops left Schlisselburg. The fascist troops tried to develop the offensive. They were stopped by the fire of our ships and coastal batteries. The ancient Russian fortress Oreshek on a small island was on the enemy's way. The scarlet flag continued to fly on its tower. Here fought 350 infantrymen and sailors. The main firepower of the fortress was an artillery battery led by Lieutenant P.N. Kochenenkov and political officer A.G. Morozov 2 76mm guns and 3 40-50 guns. Oreshek was 200 meters from the enemy. Tens of thousands shells and mines fell Hitlerites on heroic garrison, destroyed all buildings. But the fortress lived and fought, holding back the onslaught of the enemy. From Smolny they were always asking how things were going with cargo transportation through Ladoga. The city had 14 days' supply of flour, 7 days' supply of fuel for tanks and aviation. Ships, having overcome 115-kilometer way across Ladoga, stood in the roadstead. There were no berths. Cargo was ferried to the shore by boats under bombardment and shelling. The Military Council of the Leningrad Front made a decision to urgently build berths and railroad lines to them in Osinovets and Morgy Bays. Construction units of the Leningrad Front and the Navy were urgently transferred here. The deputy commander of the Ladoga military flotilla for transportation, Captain First Rank N.Y. Avramov, supervised the works. At the same time, a new navigable fairway was laid from Osinovets on the western shore to Chernaya Satama Bay on the southern shore. In Chernaya Satama, a shallow bay large ships had never visited before. The fleet sent to the lake its hydrographers headed by Captain Third Rank G.I. Zima. Within 3 days, Lieutenant E.P. Churov and his subordinates made measurements, circled the fairway, along which the first barge with evacuated workers of Kirov plant was brought to Chernaya Satama from Osinovets by the minesweeper TSH-37. The new highway went into operation. In those days I visited the lake. It was buzzing. Black clouds carried low over the water. The whole shore was in foam. But from the Osinovets roadstead there was a scraping sound. A dredger was working. I was told that it was commanded by an old riverman, NNN. Portnov. Bajameister at him IX. Gusev. They dredged the approach fairway to the piers under construction. They worked in a storm and wind. In peacetime, in such weather, no dredger went into the lake. Nikolai Yulovich Avramov was in charge on the shore. He and I were old acquaintances. In the 20s we served together on the Black Sea. He had a very colourful appearance. His face was framed by big, thick sideburns, just like a skipper from an old sea novel. Nikolai Yulievich, an experienced sailor, back in 1912 graduated from the Marine Corps, sailed a lot, participated in the First World War, near Riga led a company of sailor scouts in battle, was wounded. When he was cured, he went back to the navy. In the first days of the revolution, the sailors of the destroyer Lieutenant Ilyin elected him commander of the ship. In Soviet times, he became a teacher. In the navy, all knew him as the author of wonderful textbooks on marine science. But the war began, and the scientist again became a combat commander. He commanded a military flotilla on Lake Peipsi. Now he's fighting on Ladoga. I'm asking how things are going. Avramov waved his hand in annoyance. Not work, but misery. He complained most of all not about the lack of labour, not about enemy bombing, but about the weather. The Ladoga is raging. Look, he pointed to the shore. Sappers and sailors were building a pier. The waves sometimes covered them from head to toe, knocked them down, threw them on the rocks. People got up, collected scattered planks and logs, and again axes clattered. 2 piers were built in Osinovets, and 1 small pier was built in the neighbouring Moria Bay. To them led fairways with a depth of 1.5 to 2.5 metres. Dredging work continued, and while deep-seated transport still had to unload at the roadstead. On September 12th, the first convoy with flour arrived. It was a major event. The convoy was commanded by Captain 3rd Rank K.N. Balakirov, accompanied by warships tugs Sea Lion and BOI-led barges. They delivered 800 tons of flour. A little, of course, but the very fact of the beginning of regular voyages across the lake pleased. In 3 days, 5 ships with flour stood on the roadstead of Osinovets. The berths were not ready yet, and it delayed unloading. Sailors and Red Army men worked day and night, reloading heavy sacks onto boats and from them to the shore. But the Ladoga did not stop. In the middle of September at night, during a storm, 2 barges with ammunition and weapons broke and sank. In Osinovets Bay, the tugs Voima and Kozelsk were thrown on the rocks by the storm. The barges were partly smashed, partly scattered on the lake. The old flat-bottomed steamer Sum, already during the war elevated to the rank of a minesweeper, was ordered to rescue people from the barge in distress. The commander of Sum's senior lieutenant F.L. Hodov found the barge when it was already sinking. With great difficulty it was possible to remove people from it, but at that time enemy airplanes struck. The only anti-aircraft gun at the stern of the minesweeper opened fire. Commodore Nikolai Abakumov and his comrades forced the junkers to turn away from the combat course, but new planes came. The bomb hit the ship. Wounded Commander Abakumov and his subordinates Shurigin and Spiridonov continued to fire. Then our fighters came up and drove away the fascists. But the ship was sinking, despite the efforts of sailors. The gunboat Nora, sent to help, did not catch the minesweeper afloat. Fortunately, many sailors and Red Army men were saved. The storms continued, but caravans with food and ammunition were coming and going from Novaya Ladoga to Osinovets, and on the way back they carried evacuated inhabitants to the rear. Together with military sailors, watermen of the Northwest Shipping Company fought on Ladoga. Tugboats Oral and Nikulias under the command of Captains M.D. Erofiev and I.A. Mishenkin successfully made dozens of trips with cargo and people. The crew of Nikulias consisted mostly of girls. They were not inferior to men in courage and diligence. Leader Kobrina, Olga Patukova, sisters Kiselevs under shrapnel and bullets put towing ends on barges, helped the wounded, put out fires. Yes, everyone was a hero on Ladoga. Pavel Alexandrovich Lepestov, 70-year-old skipper of the barge, known to all rivermen, was wounded at the crossing. His daughter Tatiana took the barge on the next voyage. She perfectly coped with the task. The flotilla headquarters was relocated to Novaya Ladoga, from where it was easier to organize management. The new commander of the flotilla, Captain First Rank Viktor Sergeyevich Cherokov, a man of great knowledge and high maritime culture, my old acquaintance, he commanded a brigade of torpedo boats on Hanko, and then the detachment of ships of the Neva River and supporting our front in the area of Schlisselburg. Together with the Chief of Staff, Captain First Rank SV, Kudryavtsev, Flotilla Commissar Brigade Commissar T, Kadushkin, head of the Political Department Regimental Commissar BT. Kalachov, new commander, hotly took up the cause. In late October, early November, the flotilla accomplished a very important task. It transported from the western coast to Novaya Ladoga the 44th and 191st Rifle Divisions and the 6th Marine Rifle Brigade replenishment for the 54th Army, which stopped further advance of Hitlerites on the Volkhov direction. It was already frosty. The Iceland-fast ice did not allow to approach the shore. Nevertheless, the flotilla transferred 334 soldiers, 123 guns, dozens of tanks across the lake. The ships sailed until the ice. Some of them could not reach their anchorage places and had to winter in the ice, several kilometers from Novaya Ladoga. I recall several other episodes connected with Ladoga. At the end of September, at the height of the fighting near Leningrad, Colonel M.A. Zernov, the Chief of Communications, came to me at the Fleet Control Room. He was concerned. 42 drums of expensive imported cable were lying in the commercial port, almost on the front line. Moscow fears how the cable would not fall into the hands of the Germans, and orders to sink it in the deepest place of the Neva. I was busy with other things and did not pay much attention to Zernov's report. Not such things were lost then, but just a cable. "You can solve this issue yourself," I said. "Give the necessary orders." So the Chief of Communications of the Sea Defence of Leningrad and the Lake District, Engineer Captain of the 2nd Rank RB. Schwarzberg received the order to sink the cable. 2 days later he came to me and reported, "I consider it inexpedient to sink 300 tons of precious cable. What should we do with it?" I objected. "It will die under bombings and shells. Let it lie at the bottom of the river until better times. If it is decided to sink it, it should be done on the Ladoga, and with benefit after all, this cable will be enough from one shore to the other." I thought about it. We had suffered so much with communication. Now we talked to the big land only by radio, but it was difficult and unreliable. Laying an underwater cable would have solved the problem immediately and drastically. "Have you reported your proposal to anyone?" I had a conversation with Admiral Isakov, a member of the Military Council of the Front. I asked him for a big barge for cable transportation. He refused. "Let's go higher." Schwarzberg was persistent. He got his way. He got the barge. He was assisted by divers, hydrographers, cable specialists, fighters from the NKVD communication troops and liaison officers, employees of the People's Commissariat of Communications and specialists of the plant Sevkobel. Protopopov and Lebedev took part. By a special decision of the Military Council of the Front, the necessary watercrafts were allocated. Fortunately, on Ladoga we had a small ship Svyazist. It was also mobilized. Huge drums with cable were rolled at night onto a barge and delivered to Ozenovets. Major P.A. Anisimov, a young scientist, a real enthusiast of his work, was in charge of this work. He was assisted by a freelance engineer, M.Y. Rosenblit. According to the plan developed by R.B. Schwarzberg, cable laying began in October. The area of works was covered by patrol ships and fighter aviation of the fleet. The front was 18 kilometers away. Fascists, seeing our ships, opened fire, sent airplanes. The liaison officers had to work under bombs and shells. And it should be noted that the ship, busy laying cable, completely deprived of freedom of maneuver. From the sailors and communicators required great endurance. As in spite of all difficulties and dangers, they continued their work. And they won. In a few days the cable was laid. Leningrad received reliable telegraph and telephone communication, which operated without fail all 900 blockade days. Many years later, the secretary of the CPSU Central Committee, M.A. Suslov, will say at the solemn meeting on the occasion of awarding the Leningrad region with the Order of Lenin, "An integral part of the heroic epic of the defense of Leningrad was the organization in incredibly difficult conditions of regular communication between Leningrad and the country through Lake Ladoga. In the most difficult moments of the blockade, Leningraders did not feel themselves torn away from the motherland. The experience of cable laying came in handy when, by the decision of the front headquarters, a pipeline was laid along the bottom of Lake Ladoga to supply the city with fuel, and an electric cable to transmit power from the Volkhov hydroelectric power station. Sailors, including fleet hydrographers Lieutenant Captain P. Ivanovsky, Lieutenants A. Anishchenko and A. Namjalads took part in these works. The most difficult time for us came when ships stopped sailing along the Ladoga, and there was no ice road yet. All hopes were on the air bridge. The headquarters of the Fleet Air Force was then located in the Admiralty building, where the headquarters of the Leningrad naval base was located. I often had the opportunity to visit the commander of the fleet, Aviation Major General Aviation Michigan Samokin, and his Chief of Staff, Colonel D.I. Surkov. From Surkov I learned that back in early October, the State Defense Committee decided to organize the supply of food and ammunition to Leningrad by air. For this purpose, a special detachment of Aeroflot transport planes was formed, which included the most experienced pilots. The first airplanes safely delivered food to Leningrad, unloaded, quickly took evacuated citizens, and set a course for the big land. That's when they were attacked by fascist fighters. The airplanes of pilots K. Mikhailov and L. Ovsyannikov were shot down. The wounded pilots showed exceptional courage, reached the shore and landed their machines on the ice. The lives of dozens of people were saved. The pilots were flying without cover. Each flight could have been their last. But they flew. The pilots took 3 tons of cargo instead of 2 tons. In a day they made up to 6 flights. There were women among these heroes. The commander of one of the heavy airplanes was pilot Olga Losikova. The air bridge operated until the end of December, when the traffic on the ice road of life was restored.